so much for the introduction. She's my pretty big around here. I don't think so at all. You know, the work that I do is strictly from my heart, just to see the impact, just to go into schools and just like you say, create those culturally affirming spaces for our students, to make sure that all of our students can see themselves, but more just as important, that we can see the humanity in each other. Right. You know, we look at, you know, within public education around just this concept of representation, but representation also works like in a reciprocal manner, that I can see myself and I can kind of build pride and create just kind of a sense of identity and purpose, but also so we can appreciate and see each other. And as you know, right here, living in this lovely state of Florida, to try to do this work every single day is literally a miracle, to be able to get up and to continue to fight for, to do the things that we do. Even when you talk about the title, what I'm responsible for within the school district, the gender studies was something that was eliminated going back in June of this year, that we can't do gender studies, so we don't call it that anymore, unfortunately. I know, right? And the foolishness just keeps happening. You know, every time we think, okay, we kind of can circumvent some of the stuff that's coming in from our state legislator, and we try to continue to work, then they create new laws to kind of block that, right? But again, it's a miracle. We keep going on. We keep being resilient. And I'm going to continue to be resilient and be able to fight for ways to make sure that all of our children can see themselves represented in our classrooms in a positive way, that they can have a sense of not only belonging, but a sense of affirmation within our classroom. Regardless of what our state is doing, we're going to continue to fight that fight, right? So thank you for that. And I'm just real happy to be here. In the most humble way, I get asked to kind of speak quite often. And sometimes I show up to spaces and I'm like, why the hell am I here sometimes? Trust me, I've been in some spaces and it's like, I wish I would have called out sick for this space today. And even when I was asked about this, initially when I got the email, I said, let me Google this first before I say yes, because I had a habit for a long time saying yes to everything. Then it end up, I'm speaking 4 or 5 days a week to maybe 1 or 2 people in a room and just all kinds of just craziness. So this is a big deal. When I looked at what Creative Mornings was and the work that you're doing, it's simply incredible. It's super dope. And I was just more than honored, like, damn, okay, I must be a little something that you all was able to invite me to speak into this space. So I'm just more than honored and privileged to be in this space. In addition to, I'm always honored to speak in any of the spaces when you talk about Palm Beach County, going into the local community. When I say the local community of Palm Beach County, I'm very rooted in this community, right? You know, and living in South Florida, a lot of people are not really from South Florida. In a lot of cases, it's a very transient kind of location, but I'm from Palm Beach. As a matter of fact, I'm 5 generations from Palm Beach County. So my family's actually been in this local area. Like, I remember Rosemary when it wasn't this beautiful. Trust me on that. I remember getting haircuts from a barbershop that was right down the street, and it did not look like this at all. So my family's been in this area since the 19th century, since the 1800s. So literally, if you go right down the street to the Palm Beach County Historical Society, you know, there is like displays with my family members that are actually part of it, right? So I'm just always honored to be in this space. In addition to, you know, just thinking about my background, it's so forth, my environment, how I grew up. I'm definitely what you call an anomaly from what I grew up in. I grew up in a household of, I had 4, it was 4 of us, including myself, of course. I don't think my dad worked maybe 3-4 jobs at a time. You know, I know my dad worked the 20 to 21 hours a day to make sure that he can provide for our household. In addition to, I don't think that my dad made it past maybe 9th grade with an education. My mother went to college for like a minute before she got pregnant with my older brother. I got an older sister, oldest brother who didn't graduate high school. Then I had another brother that went to college for just like a brief second before he got into some trouble, to end up having to come back home. So even in my immediate family, and I don't say this in a way to brag or just kind of elevate myself above my peers, because I come from a family of geniuses, but I was the only one to actually go and get a formal education and go to college. So getting a graduate degree and a postgraduate degree and so forth was a big deal, just considering those circumstances. And even when I go back in my story, even in my senior year in high school, because I graduated locally right here at Suncoast Community High School, and I had no plans on going to college. And matter of fact, it wasn't until, the summer after I graduated that became an option for me to go to college. And that option was strictly because my mother, remember, it was just like one of those days, I'm saying remember like you all were there, right? Because it's such a clear memory to me because of just the way it happened, right? Because the summer, I'm just hanging out, I'm chilling. I'm telling everybody I'm going to be a rapper. That was my goal. I was going to be, somebody asked me, am I a musician? Obviously, and I was like, no, I wasn't a very good one. So apparently that didn't work out. But I just remember taking a nap midday in the middle of the week, and she literally kicked my door in. And I don't know if we have any kids here, but the words was a lot of stuff that she said in front of that, ass up, and we going to the school to register for school. So she put me into Palm Beach Community College. And it still wasn't a smooth ride from there, right? Usually most people go get an associate's degree in 2 years. It took me 4.5 years to get an associate degree because I just played around. School was not a very engaging thing for me. Even through high school, through elementary, through middle school, great. They're doing like some construction right here behind me, but I'm gonna keep rolling because we're resilient, right? And to say that, and it took me forever because of that engagement. I couldn't really kind of tap in because I didn't see the relevance of it. In addition to even going through K-12 education, I didn't never get an opportunity to see myself represented in that, and I didn't see where I belonged within just the educational process. Even when it came to most of my history, I didn't learn my history in the K-12. I learned my history outside of that. Actually, as a matter of fact, we're talking about this theme of rhythms, and we're talking about hip hop. The first time that I ever had an opportunity to, even get any kind of exposure to my own history and culture, right? It was literally through a rap song that I heard. And I hope y'all can still hear me despite all of the work that needs to be done, like literally right now, right? So it wasn't until then that I got exposure to a few rap songs, but I would hear like lyrics. And there was a rapper named Razkaz. Very not real known, very underground. And Razkaz, okay, there we go. My bro heard of Razkaz before, right? So there were some mentions of Black history and culture in that. Look at that, we turned it up. Here we go. Cool, dope. I'm loving it. So that was my exposure to it. And that was also my inspiration because of my lack of engagement, because of just what I wasn't exposed to and what I would also see in the environment that I came from also inspired me to eventually become an educator. I remember when I finally got my life together and started actually paying attention and actually doing what I was supposed to do in undergrad, I was to that point like, okay, what am I going to do? And I remember going to my mother's room and I say, Mom, I don't really know what I want to do with my degree and so forth. And she said, what do you love? And I said, I would love to go change, how education works. But I said, I won't make a lot of money in that, right? And she said, baby, you have to do what you love. You have to do something that's impactful. You have to do something that you feel that God has driven you to do. And I said, I'm inspired to do it. I'm going to move forward and do it. And again, just like I said, I was the youngest of us. I was the first one to actually go to college. And I remember that day she said, baby, you're going to make me proud. You're going to be the first of my kids to actually graduate. You have to make this happen. So first of all, I want to honor her in this space because it was my last semester in college when I was getting ready to graduate, and I remember coming home and found my mother passed away. She had a heart attack in her sleep, so she never got the opportunity to see what I'm doing today and what I've become, and just her dreams and just the prayers and just the work that she pushed me to do to this day. So I want to definitely honor her in this space that I'm able to come here and just kind of bring a message to you all as well. So outside of the work with the school district, I also founded my own company called Power Builders, Teach, Heal, Build, which is an educational consulting company. And I've seen some people that I've worked with before through my company around creating those culturally affirming spaces, doing curriculum, doing seminars on Black history and culture, around this whole concept of power builders. And this thing is called Teach, Heal, Build. You teach people about their authentic history so they can develop a sense of identity and purpose. Right? Then it can heal from just the implications of social exclusion, racism, and those things that have psychologically damaged a lot of our people in minoritized communities throughout this world. Then when we say build, right, we're talking about building a sense of solidarity, and we can build our own communities in a fashion that we can prosper as people. Right, so that teach, heal, build thing, and when we say power builders, we're talking about power builders bringing our authentic history into the space, right? And that's why we segue into this concept that we say are rhythms. Because one of the things that we do is that we have a strong focus on Afrocentric curriculum, and we're talking about the history of just Black history and Black folks in general. And when we talk about Black history is usually kind of perceived as just this horrible thing. Right, we kind of center the oppression. We talk about the racial oppression, the discrimination, the racism, the domestic terrorism. We talk about the aspects of slavery. We hear all those things when we usually talk about Black history. So we almost make it synonymous to this miserable thing. And that's why a lot of cases, even when we go into schools, a lot of our children don't want to know Black history, but because they think they automatically relate it to just these horrible aspects in history. But that's not entirely true. That's not our story. When you say the definition of rhythm is a repeated movement or a pattern. And one of the patterns that we know of Black folks is always a pattern of resistance, and resistance to get to the outcome of joy. Right? That's really our history, right? When you really want to talk about framing the narrative of Black folks, our narrative is resistance and joy. Right, and that's how we've always kind of operated, right? Even if we want to kind of start with slavery, right? We want to talk about that concept, is that even in slavery, that us as a people, we've always resisted that, right? Sometimes people think that when we see these wonderful Hollywood productions about slavery and just this acquiescence and a submission to just the oppression that we face is our whole story, but it's not our story. Right? Even during those systems of oppression that we resisted. In some cases, we resisted in the most violent of fashions, right? With violent resistance. That's why you see things such as the 1791 Haitian Revolution, Nat Turner, the Gabriel Process, the Denmark Vestige, the Stoner Rebellion, and even here in South Florida, right? A lot of people don't know that South Florida came to existence through a slave rebellion. The longest, most expensive, costliest slave rebellion in U.S. history, which was called the Seminole Wars. Right here in Palm Beach County, where a lot of those battles were actually fought. A lot of people don't realize that's what the Seminole Wars that predicated that was all about, right? It was about the alliances of Native Americans and African Americans who had fled slavery in Spanish Florida to protect their freedom, right? So all of our history is really about resistance and joy. And when you look back in different moments, and I think one of our brilliant sisters in here asked me, how do you teach concepts through music and through art, right? One of the ways that we've always resisted is if that we can't physically go out and resist because of just the systems and structures that kind of held us down, is that it was through our artistic expression that we were able to do it. It was through our music, it was through our arts. Even during slavery, we had spirituals, we sung to be able to endure just the horrible experiences that we experienced on plantations and wherever it was that we were enslaved, right? So even when we go back, right, we go back to 1896. Does anybody know what happened in 1896 that really kind of shifted the trajectory of this entire country? Anybody? Nah. It's 1865 for slavery being abolished. But 1896, there was a Supreme Court case known as Plessy versus Ferguson, right? That's what codified what we know as Jim Crow systems and racial segregation in this country, which had horrible implications, not only in the Black community, because sometimes we think about racism, we think about these horrible things. They didn't only have horrible implications on our communities, it had implications on all Americans. Right? Because these things have horrible, deleterious, long-lasting effects on the way that we interact, the way that we perceive each other, the way that we embrace each other, and just even our views politically and socially, because of just these horrible systems that were placed in around us. But in 1896, Plessy Ferguson ushered in just that state-mandated racial segregation that completely immobilized the Black community in a lot of cases. Right, it kind of forbade access to a lot of the mainstream institutions in this country. But how do we respond to that? right? And it was one of the things that the way that we responded is the mother of all music in this country and all popular music in this country is something that we know as the blues, right? And the reason it's called the blues is because it was horrible, right? It was a way to expressing horrible experiences, right? So if you kind of listen to a lot of those blues songs, it's not very happy, right? A lot of it is a lot of themes of talking about racial oppression, and you'll also find if you go back, especially in the earlier part of the 20th century, that most blues songs all had the title Jim Crow blues, Jim Crow this, Jim Crow that, right? It was that way of resisting. It was a way of resisting these systems. If I couldn't physically go out and protest because, I can lose my job, in a lot of cases, even the most extreme cases, lose my life to fight against these systems, right? And one of the things that even as we were doing the silent disco out front is that music and art was a unifying thing, right? We talk about movement as a unifying thing, but also music is a unifying thing. So in some cases, you had white audiences that was listening to these forms of resistance being entertained by it at the same time, right? So, we created blues music out of that response. Then even during that time period, remember I said one of the things that we were always going to do is we were going to always find a way of joy, right? And you'll find this is a common rhythm, common pattern in Black resistance is also finding ways of joy. So eventually you see something that we know is jazz music, right? Especially around the 1915s, around 19 teens and going into the 1920s, around the Harlem Renaissance. Right, when you see a huge migration of Black folks leaving the southern states, going to different part of the countries, going to the Northeast, the Midwest. So we say the Great Migration lasted around to about 1915 to around 1970, actually, when you say the Great Migration. But during that time period, it was the first time in American history that we were responsible for creating and projecting our own images to mainstream America. Before that, the only image that mainstream America had of us was the minstrel show, vaudeville, and so forth, right? So now we created jazz and we had those movements and so forth and finding ways to create joy, right? Because if you go back and look at some of the older jazz artists, like your Cab Callaways, your Duke Ellingtons and so forth, that's joy. That's complete movement. That's complete joy that they were actually experiencing, right? And it was something that they were projecting, right? Despite the misery, despite the things that we were going through, that we found ways to create and manufacture joy through our artistic expression. And even sometimes our resistance wasn't as joyous like the blues. Like one of the things that were happening since the Reconstruction era going all the way to about 1963 was lynchings that were very prevalent in our communities. We have documented cases of over 2,000 or so lynchings of African Americans and also their allies who fought with them that were killed. Right, and even some cases we resisted that by, if you listen to Billie Holiday, Strange Fruit, right, which is all about just an anti-lynching protest song, right? So we have all of those things. We have blues, we have jazz, right? Then eventually by the 1960s, when we get into the Black arts movement, right, you have a lot of spoken word. You people like Gil Scott-Heron, the revolution would not be televised. There we go, my brother again is on it. Right, then we have other artists during that time period, the Watts Prophets, the Last Poets, etc., all talking about resistance, right? And that's why we segue into hip hop, right? And right now we're in 2023, right? And we usually celebrate 2023 as the 50th anniversary of hip hop. I disagree with that, right? And I like to push back on that, right? When people say it just started with DJ Kool Herc in 1973 in the Bronx, New York, and so forth. Right? And even when you start to kind of understand the history of hip hop, that wasn't even a concept that hip hop started in 1973 to like the early 90s that became a consensus of that was the birth of hip hop. I always say that hip hop always existed. It existed since West Africa. It existed within the rhythm of the drums in West Africa. And when you talk about the rhythm of the drums, and a lot of people don't know this fact, that even on plantations and so forth, the drum was something that was banned eventually. Right? It was something that couldn't be utilized because the drum was a signal of revolution and also resistance again, right? So we use our rhythm as a form of resistance, right? So when you talk about the drums in Western Africa, when you talk about the blues, when you talk about jazz, and you talk about spoken word, right? You bring all that together, then we eventually get hip hop. But hip hop always existed. Matter of fact, take notes. right? When you go back and listen to the Jubileers, a song called Noah. It's a gospel song, and it was produced in the 1940s, called Noah. It's rap music, it's hip hop, right? When you go back and listen to it, there was a famous comedian that I didn't even know about until my dad would constantly talk about this comedian named Pigmeat Markham, right? A lot of people have never heard of him. There was a famous song that he created called Here Comes the Judge, for example, right? Here Comes the Judge is hip hop. Right? So it was something that always existed. And even a beautiful thing about hip hop, we talk about resistance, we talk about our oppression, we talk about the conditions, and we talk about New York City specifically during this time period. And anybody in here from New York? All right, okay, we got a few New Yorkers. We're in South Florida, so usually when you say New York, a lot of people want to raise their hands. There's more people from New York than people from Florida that live here, right? And there's no diss and no slate to my New York folks, right, at all. But you know, looking at the economic situation that was happening in New York during that time period, right? Even prior to that.